Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 175 of the podcast. We're kind of wrapping up this series from the Volunteer Bootcamp where we're talking about all things volunteers, recruiting and training. And this week, we're talking about empowering volunteers with Jon Birkmire. You're going to hear a snippet from Jon's teaching from the Volunteer Bootcamp. And then I'm going to ask him some questions that we weren't able to get to in that live event. And so you're going to love hearing from that. If you have been listening to the podcast for a long time, you might remember hearing Jon Birkmire on the podcast not too long ago talking about this very topic, but it's great to hear from him again, hit some questions and all that. Now, before we jump into the episode, I want to remind you that in a few weeks, we've got some webinars coming up with Ministry Boost that are free, that are going to be helpful for you. One is creating a sensational ministry environment. Did you know that most churches only keep about 10 to 20% of their first-time guests? And great churches might keep 30%, maybe a little more. So it's not like, you're going to do something, radical and keep half of your first-time guests or 3/4 or something like that. But just think of the difference we can make in helping people find and follow Jesus if we could go from keeping 10% of our guests to 30%. And now 3 times as many people are taking steps to connect with Jesus. That would be amazing, wouldn't it? And one of the things we overlook sometimes with that is the environments that we create. What does it feel like? And not just feel like, what are all the senses involved when somebody comes in and experiences our environment, whether it's for children's ministry, student ministry, adults, main services, whatever it might be, the environment matters. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about in an upcoming webinar. That's going to be on Thursday, January 23rd, 12:30 Eastern. And then a few weeks later, we're going to have a big webinar about developing leaders. This was one of the most requested topics when we've had some gatherings with Ministry Boost students and some of our mastermind groups from years ago. One of the most requested topics is leadership development. And so we're going to host a conversation, an online event called Developing Leaders, a Pipeline and a Plan for Growing Your Ministry Team. That's going to be Wednesday, February 12th, 1 p.m. Eastern. In both of those webinars, we're going to announce some really cool new things. In the Sensational Environments webinar, we're going to talk about some ideas that are already out there that most church leaders aren't leveraging to create great environments. And then in the later one, in Developing Leaders, we're going to announce something brand new for Ministry Boost. So you don't want to miss those. We have another one in the works that's all about keeping kids safe online. So once we get that scheduled, we'll let you know about that as well. But enough about that. You can find all of it at ministryboost.org or ministryboost.org/webinars. But let's go ahead now and listen to that snippet from Jon teaching in the Volunteer Bootcamp, and then we'll get to the questions that we weren't able to get to during that live event.
For our church community here in Gainesville, we've only been around for about 10 years, but we started with the end in mind, and we started with a volunteer coach and volunteer director model. And what it pushed up against for us, or what it really leaned into, was a tension that we felt like that existed in the local church, which is that staff members, people that are paid on staff, are often the people that do 90% of the work and definitely handle 100% of the leadership, influence, and vision casting for their ministry environment. And while that makes sense, when you look at your job description, if you're on staff at a church, hopefully you have a job description. And when you look at it, oftentimes there's a bunch of things that are there that you are expected to do. It's the thing that you're paid to do. It's your job. But at the end of the day, our ministry influence and growth will be limited if we are the only person that ever leads those various things, if we're the only person that's doing that stuff. And so most of us, we have volunteers. We all love our volunteers. That's what this entire call is about. But oftentimes our focus when it comes to volunteers is just on filling holes. It's just on, saying, okay, I've got someone that can hold babies this Sunday, and I have someone that can, be a storyteller, or someone who can be a student ministry small group leader, or a host on stage. And oftentimes our focus is just on filling holes and not empowering leaders. And I think that that's what my talk is. Well, I know that that's what my little bit here is all about, is that I want to help you understand what it looks like to empower volunteers in your ministry area, to not just plug holes for you anymore, but rather to be people who own a portion of ministry inside of the ministry that you lead. And so whether you're a children's ministry director, a student ministry director, or pastor, or minister, or whatever your title is, whatever your sphere of influence is. My hope is that by the end of this, you'll understand what it looks like to hand somebody and allow them to own a portion of ministry. So we're going to get right into it. The goal here is to understand what it looks like to hand off portions of ministry. It's all about empowerment. And so for our church, we have volunteer directors. Below them, we have volunteer coaches and producers. Coaches and producers in our world are very similar. And here's what that means. A volunteer director is someone who owns a portion of ministry. They're kind of like the manager of a certain environment. And so our world, I have a full-time children's ministry director and a full-time student ministry director. But underneath them, we have volunteer directors who lead things like large group, people who lead things like service programming. They're in charge of planning how the large group experience on Sunday is going to go. We have volunteer groups directors. They own all of the groups portion of what we do. We have volunteer directors that oversee all of our curriculum department. We have people who oversee volunteer directors who oversee all of our guest services experiences. And so those directors are kind of like, if you want to think about restaurant world or any type of for-profit entity, normally a director in that world would be like a manager. And then right below them with our coaches and producers, in a lot of ways, are our assistant managers. And so the job of a coach or the job of a producer is to instruct and train and own the Sunday morning experience. And so for us, our coaches, their job is to instruct and to train and to kind of coach leaders along the way. And we have those in all different areas of our ministries. But so those are our coaches. Then our producers are just like coaches are, but they're in our large group worship environments, whether it be in our preschool environment or elementary environment or in middle school. We have producers that are in charge of the execution of that experience. So they're going to lead the worship leaders. They're going to lead our tech team. They're going to do all of that type of stuff. So here's how this works. What I would like for us to think through is understand that it has to start with us. I want everybody on this call to think through the things that you're currently doing right now, whatever your role is. I want you to start with you. What are the areas in your ministry that are taking up a ton of your time? Maybe they're things that you're not very good at. For me, I'm not very good at the curriculum side of things. I'm not the guy that can sit down at the computer and download all the stuff from our curriculum website and cut out all the things. And so very early on, I said, I need to find someone who can own this. Not someone who can just do it, but someone who can own the entire strategy. And so that was the first thing that I started with. And so we brought on a volunteer director for that role. And that person owned the entire experience and the entire workload and influence and strategy, everything about curriculum. And so we had a volunteer director for that. Another thing that I'm not very good at a lot of things, but another thing that I'm not very good at is thinking through all the details of what makes a production or a service or a large group experience really, really great. And so I brought on someone who was very, very good at that. His name is Daniel, and he is the owner of that entire experience for our elementary large group. So start there. And then I think the other piece that we need to think about is thinking about transferable models. That's why we decided to call the roles director, coach, and producer. In family ministry and in all other avenues of our church, all the different departments and ministry areas, we use the exact same language for those roles. So we have volunteer directors on our guest services team. We have volunteer directors and volunteer coaches in our adult groups ministry. So it's important, I think, to have common language all the way across. The other thing you just have to do is you've got to create job descriptions. Clarity is so important when it comes to asking someone to join your ministry area. And then lastly, it's important that we develop an onboarding process. So it's important that before you ask someone to take on an important portion or an important role in your ministry area, you've thought through how you're going to onboard them. How are you going to train this person to do the thing, that you're asking them to do? If you're asking someone to be your large group director and to own that portion of ministry, and you just lead them to go and lead others, to be a leader of leaders if they're directors, you need to think through what is it going to take to onboard them. And I'm going to cover that in just a few moments. But here's the bottom line before we move on to the next part, and I'm going to wrap up and do some questions, is that you have people that are sitting in your seats, people that are on your teams right now that you would say, oh my goodness, if I could just clone this person, if I could just have 10, Sarahs, or if I could have, 20 Darnells, I would just love to clone them. And right now they're just a small group leader or they're just a storyteller. My encouragement to you was, if there's someone that you would love to clone on your team, make them a coach. Make them a coach, someone who says, hey, this is how I do it. This is what I do. This is what I own. And I'm going to teach you how to do it. And so pull them out of being a small group leader. It might create a little bit of a gap for a season, but that's okay. If you have people on your team that are high capacity people that want to, make a difference in your ministry area, take them out of that role and give them a new one. Make them an owner, a vision caster, a trainer, whatever the thing is that they're good at, so that you can hand off a portion of ministry to them and build a larger team. I saw somebody just mentioned org chart and job descriptions. I can share. I know that Kenny has posted some of that on some of his websites. I know Nick has as well, so I can share that with you. But as we wrap up, just to cover it again, you have your volunteer directors, and their job is to own a portion of ministry. So they would own groups, they would own large group, they might own your guest services experience, they may own your curriculum. Those are the 4 director levels that we have. Then you may have coaches. You've got coaches who instruct and train. They're the people that help with onboarding, all of that type of stuff. And also they're like our hallway monitors on Sunday morning. And then of course our producers who instruct and train as well. And so this is kind of the way that I like to talk about it. When you think about the process of onboarding these types of people, it's ADAPT, A-D-A-P-T. The first thing that you have to do is make the ask. Ask that person that you've identified that you would love to have to be on on your team. Ask them to be a part of it and give them a job description. Help them understand what's going to happen. Put them in charge of a budget line. Get them onboarded. Get them rolling. The next thing you need to do is D. You need to download all the information that you have to them. You need to give them all the information that they need, all the documents, all the sheets, whatever the role is with them. Maybe they're in production. You need to show them how to turn on the tech board. This is also that you can have people on your team that are owning a portion of ministry, so that you move from being a doer as a ministry leader, so you're always running around doing, to moving into a position of just leading leaders, to really be more like the CEO of children's ministry or the CEO of student ministry. And below you, you have these amazing volunteers who are really the managers of your ministry, which takes a lot of trust, but I believe that you can do it. We have tons of them here at our church. It's been very successful for us. The next thing you need to do is you need to apprentice them. And here's how I break up apprenticing. And so for those of you that are taking notes or following along, I know this is being recorded as well. Here's what it looks like to apprentice. It starts with I do, you watch, we talk. And then it moves to I do, you help, we talk. After that, you're going to help them do it. So it's you do, I help, we talk about it. Notice each time we're going to circle back and talk about it. And then it's you do, I watch, we talk. You do, I watch, we talk. And then the last one is you do, and somebody else watches. So by the end of this apprenticeship, the person that you're investing in, the person you're bringing on to be a coach or volunteer director, hopefully they are now saying, hey, this is what I do. New person, come check it out so that you can learn from me. The very, very last idea behind all of this is to prepare them and then turn them loose. The best thing that you can do, the very best thing that you can do once you have volunteer coaches or volunteer directors, is to get out of the way. There's nothing worse than asking someone to take on a key piece of ministry and say, hey, you're a volunteer director, you're a volunteer coach now, but you're the one who's constantly following them around and getting in the way of leading. Maybe you've asked them to take on a portion of ministry, but for some reason you're constantly, doing things for them. You have high capacity leaders sitting in your seats right now that are looking for high capacity opportunity to lead other leaders, to own a portion of ministry, and to be influencers in what you're doing. And so that's why this volunteer director, volunteer coach, and producer system matters. I believe that you can do it. And I'm going to be able to share some resources with you. Again, Nick and Kenny, I think both have gotten some of my job descriptions and my org charts and all that type of stuff, which I can share. So at this point, I'm going to go to questions with whoever's going to ask this.
Yeah. Hey, Jon, really good. Several people have asked, what was that apprentice plan again?
Yes.
Can you say that again slowly? Because people are taking notes.
Slowly. Yeah. Yes. Number 1, I do, you watch, we talk about it. Number 2, I do, you help, we talk. Number 3, you do, I help, we talk. Number 4, you do, I watch, we talk. And then the very last one, which is about replacing yourself in ministry, number 5, you do and somebody else watches.
All right, Jon, thanks for sharing with us on the Volunteer Bootcamp, talking about empowering volunteers. And we didn't get to all the questions, so let's hit some more of the questions that we couldn't talk about on that live call, starting with this one. How do you decipher whether or not somebody, a potential volunteer is a high-functioning volunteer or just a coach? Or not just a coach, but could they just be a high-functioning volunteer and maybe they're just really good and reliable? Or could they be a coach and lead other people?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it really goes with the last part of your question there, which is, can they lead other people? Are other people going to follow them? And this is, particularly true if they're going to be a small group leader, coach, or a groups director, or frankly, a director of a large portion of ministry. I think the real question that we always have to ask when it comes to that in regards to, is this person a high capacity leader that is just a really great small group leader, and should always just be a small group leader? Or is this someone who can be a leader of leaders? And that's really the question. And so I think that is really for us the big question. And then the way that we answer that is through just evaluating them and just spending some time watching them, maybe even checking out what do they do in their private, their private life as far as occupation, or, the way that they, volunteer their time. Are they the president of the PTA, those types of things. And then just having a conversation with them. I think it's totally acceptable to have a really upfront and honest conversation with them and just say, hey, I see you as someone who's just knocking it out of the park as a small group leader or as a storyteller. And I have this kind of thing I'm wrestling with right now. And it's this, could you be the type of person that I could hand ownership to, ministry ownership to, and, bring them into that conversation after you have evaluated them for a while. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a process to it. I wouldn't say that we have like a game plan handout for them. But I think we all know kind of the core things we're looking for in someone who's going to lead other people. Are they organized? Do they communicate clearly? Are they a good evaluator? That's a big one. Are they coming to you, sharing evaluation? I often encourage my staff to remember that sometimes the people that frustrate us the most because they're always telling us how they think something could have been better, 9 times out of 10, that person's not a complainer. They're an evaluator. and that just means that there's someone that we need to hand a portion of ministry to and help them take on ownership, and then to allow them to help us make something better. So yeah, just really taking the time to watch them and ask some of those questions. Are they an evaluator? Are they organized? Do they communicate clearly? Are they passionate about the mission and vision of our church? And honestly, are they a learner? Are they learning, or do they have a desire to learn on their own? Most of my volunteer directors over the years have asked me for books. Have been like, hey, what are you reading about children's ministry or student ministry or family ministry? And when they ask me for a resource like that and I haven't offered it to them, it tells me that they care more than just Sunday care, and that's great. If someone just cares on Sunday, that's great. But if they're willing to take time out of their week to, ask to be invited to Orange Conference or to Orange Tour, or read a book, that tells me that this is someone who really takes this seriously and wants to take it to another level.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when we introduced the idea of the coach role a long time ago, I remember saying, hey, if you've ever looked and thought, I think we should do that differently, or I think we could do that better. You know what I mean? This might be for you. But it was funny because as I was saying it, one of the volunteers had a look on her face like, what? Who would do that? And I thought, I understand why that looks on your face, because you're probably not wired to be a leader. You would never ask something like that. And it was kind of funny but that's what I wanted, was people who think that way.
Yep.
So two of the questions were kind of similar, I think. One said, do you have descriptions or a checklist that you hand off to the volunteer when you ask them to step into a different role? And you do have job descriptions that you've freely given away, and we'll link to that again. And then the other one was, how often do you train them or meet with them to follow up and get them fully equipped for the role? So that onboarding, kind of getting them started process, what's that look like?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So, and it's kind of different for everyone. but I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible. For me as a family ministry director in our context, I lead staff. So, in some of my former years and earlier roles, even I was the family ministry director, and that just meant that I was the student ministry director and the kids ministry director at the same time. There was no other staff. And so back in those days, I was much more involved in the training, development, recruitment, onboarding process of these leaders. So if you're a family ministry director and you're in that boat, definitely, understand that as a family ministry director, you're going to have to do that. For me now, I lead a staff of a full-time student ministry director and a full-time children's ministry director, and they are really the ones that carry the brunt of the load of the onboarding process. I really don't do a ton with that. I really feel like my job is to resource them with the resources to train and develop, to help them in the recruiting process by building relationships on Sunday mornings while they're running around getting stuff done, and by funneling people to them, and then holding some quarterly or 2 times a year, 1 time a year, whatever it looks like for us that year, large training experiences and a retreat. So I'll kind of make this very simple in the fact that for almost all of our roles, there's a 3 to 4 week training period on our onboarding documents, and I can share those as I have before. And in that time period, they're shadowing whoever the person was that's been holding that role previously. In other talks before, Nick, I've said this, that even if you don't have these roles filled on an org chart, you do have them filled, and it's you. You're the person who is the curriculum director, right? You're the person who's the large group director. You might not have those roles, necessarily on an org chart somewhere, or you've thought about them, but at the end of the day, you are all of those things, all while leading your ministry. And so, you as the kids director, you might be the person who is, since you've been the upstream, the elementary large group director for however long, you're going to be the person that's going to need to train them to do what you've done. And so that normally for us is a 3 to 4 week process of just meeting with them regularly, allowing them to, watch me or watch my staff do what they're doing, what we've asked them to do. And then from there, we have what we call DRs, which are direct reports. That's just an organizational term that we have here at Anthem. And for all of our coaches and directors, they have a monthly DR with the person who leads them. So our elementary large group director meets once a month with our elementary director. Our, a curriculum director meets once a month, sometimes more often than that, with our, our staff person who leads preschool or leads elementary. So that tends to be the scope of that, is those regular meetings. And then honestly, I'm a firm believer in the death by meeting principle. And so hopefully a lot of problems and a lot of things can be solved just by, text messages or GroupMe, which is a wonderful app, and asking questions like that along the way. But the training for us tends to be a 3 to 4 week training period, and then a 1 to 3 month kind of onboarding season of, okay, we've trained them how to do this role, but now we want to onboard them by checking in with them regularly and coming into their environment and evaluating them for a solid day and really watching them, being a fly on the wall. And that tends to be a 1 to 3 months, depending upon the role, depending upon the person.
And these next 2 questions kind of like, if that's 101, and getting them ready and helping them learn with it. This is like 201. Like, how do you train a volunteer director to your staff standards? And then another question was just the person was thinking, man, that's such a big role. Like the idea of having a volunteer oversee all of curriculum sounds amazing, but it seems like a lot of information that would have to be communicated. So talk about even not just the onboarding process, that's one thing, but then how do you help them, be like almost like staff? Like people would look at them and think they're staff, obviously.
Yeah. Well, there's a few things that we do that I think are really helpful. The first one is, we announce them to the entire team in that role. We celebrate them. They get, our staff name tags look a little bit different, but our volunteer directors get a name tag, like a magnetic name tag, like whatever your church has. Find something similar so that at least at the bare minimum, your your paid staff name tag does look a little bit different, but we still want to give them a name tag that has their name on it, that has their title. Whereas all of our volunteers that are, small group leaders and things like that, they wear a lanyard with a printed, name tag on it. We want to give our volunteer directors and coaches a, something a little bit more professional looking, I guess you might say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, so that's kind of part one. And that just sets them up to win. You're investing maybe just $10 in a name tag that says, hey, you're someone worth investing in. And then additionally, actually investing in them, buying them coffee every once in a while when you take them out, just, making them feel like they are part of staff. We would do that for a staff member. We should do that for them. We invite them into, important planning meetings. We ask them for their opinions on, stuff that we're choosing to do in the life of our church. One of the things that we have at our church, maybe a little bit different than others, is we have something called MTRs, and MTRs are ministry team representatives, and they meet every other month with our lead pastor, and he talks with them through like everything that's going on in the life of our church, stuff that we're dreaming about, thinking about. And most of our volunteer directors and coaches, they are MTRs, and so they meet once a month, with about 10, 15 other people just like them. They eat dinner together, and they have an opportunity to share to the lead pastor, their experience, their thoughts, their concerns about, big things that are coming up. So that helps. We take them to Orange Conference or Drive. So since we're a North Point strategic partner, we go to Drive, which is North Point's kind of big, conference thing. So we do every other year. One year we go to Orange, the next year we go to Drive. And when we go to that, we make sure that all of our volunteer directors and coaches can come along. We do retreats with them. We do a once a year retreat with all of our volunteer directors and coaches, in an attempt, again, to get away, to talk about the year. We allow them to speak into, the big picture planning for the year. I think that that's important. And one thing that kind of scares people when I mention it, but we put them in charge of a budget line. And so, if they're the groups director, just for an example, then I'm going to put them in charge of a budget line. I'm going to say, hey, each month you have $100 or $50 or whatever it is, to use to appreciate your small group leaders, and you're responsible for using that money wisely, and things like that. So again, treating them like staff means treating them like staff and putting them in charge of a budget line. And in our world, they just turn in credit card receipts, and we reimburse them for what they've spent on appreciating their volunteers. So again, treating them like staff sometimes can be a little bit messy, but it means that we invite them into the things that we would invite staff into, and we trust them and resource them the way that we would trust and resource staff.
That's awesome. You explained, and you'll probably have to explain it here again, kind of your structure and how does this all work. And then one question that came up, though, was what's the difference in that structure between like a volunteer coach and a volunteer producer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for us, the difference between a volunteer coach and a volunteer producer is honestly just the space in which they are leading. For us, we feel like the language or the descriptor of producer sounds more environment correct or specific for the large group service environment, or whatever it is you want to call, the space where you're doing the dancing and the singing and storytelling or communicating, whatever it is you call what you do. Someone who is a producer in that environment, they're just like a coach. And the fact that they are there on Sunday morning, they don't have a ton of midweek responsibilities, but the producer is different than the coach in the fact that they are responsible for producing the experience in whatever environment that they're in. So, making some of the calls during the service to make sure, play that video, or, turn down that audio cue, or, make sure that somebody's coming on the stage at the right time or coming off the stage, and evaluating. So they're a coach in the fact that they're responsible for a specific service time. So all of our producers, just like all of our coaches, are but our service times, Nick, are 9:15 and 11, right? So 9:15 coach and producer. We got an 11 o'clock, coach and producer as well. But the main distinction is just the difference in environment that they're in. We felt like the language of being a producer in that environment, in a production-esque environment, a large group environment, whatever your churches call it, that language made more sense. So the main difference would just be that instead of like coaching along small group leaders to be great small group leaders, a producer is there to coach along and encourage and evaluate the overall production of our Sunday morning large group experience for kids not birth, but 2s and 3s all the way up through high school. We have producers that are making sure that everything about the service is excellent, flowing well, and then evaluating that as well. But as far as the midweek responsibilities, it's very, very similar to that of a coach, and the fact that we're not asking them to plan anything. We're just asking them to be there on Sunday.
Yeah, and like on the small group side for you all, it's kind of like small group leader is led by a coach, is led by a director. And then on the large group side, it could be like a host or a worship leader or a storyteller is led by a producer who's led by a director, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So the structure's the same. Name, some responsibilities are a little different. That's helpful. How about this? I think this one comes up a lot, especially for folks that are like implementing some kind of coaching structure or something for the first time. Can someone stay as a small group leader and be a coach? Can they double dip?
That's a great question. I would say we kind of joke around here at Anthem that our only policy is that we have conversations over policy. Like our policy is conversation over policy. So I don't really have a big policy on that. I do have an opinion on it, which is that I don't think it's best for someone to be a coach and a small group leader, or a volunteer director and a small group leader. I think we ask so much of small group leaders, and for them to really do what we want them to do, they need to be able to just focus on being a small group leader. And the same thing is true, for, vice versa for coaches. So I say that to say, I think we've had one, maybe two, volunteers of the hundreds we've had over the years, who we've said, hey, yeah, you can finish out, your year of being a small group leader and start and, begin onboarding into being a coach or something like that. So one, maybe two, but I really don't think that it's wise to do that, at least at our scope and scale. Maybe in a much smaller church setting where maybe, you've got, I don't know, maybe just a few volunteers and just a few kids, then sure. If you just really need someone to handle the administrative side of being a coach, outside of Sunday, then absolutely, have that person double dip. But I would say very quickly as your church grows, because it will if you're implementing this model, I believe, they're just not going to be able to have the bandwidth to do that anymore. So it's really about evaluating bandwidth, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I told you that we have one person that's ever been able to do both together, and even now today he doesn't do that, but he did for a season, and he's the rare guy. He wakes up at 4:30 a.m. He has like more discipline, than I've ever been able to have. So
absolutely, yeah.
Some people could do it. I also know of a church and children's ministry where they, with no coaches at all, implement them really fast because this is all they did. So all of their coaches were also small group leaders. And again, I'm with you. I wouldn't do that long term to get things going, or a season, or until they replace themselves. Yeah. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was the one advantage is they pulled it off fast, but I don't think it's a good thing long term.
Definitely not a long term thing. But if it's what you need to do to kickstart a coaching model, then absolutely. If it takes a little bit of a sacrifice there for a couple months to get the ball rolling on this type of a system, then absolutely. But it's definitely not a sustainable long-term strategy.
All right, last question here.
Yep.
And this person kind of gave an example of their context. They're talking about they have some older people in their church who have even been on paid staff before in roles. Mm-hmm. And she can see them wanting to get involved, but not necessarily like in boots on the ground roles, like leading kids on the floor, small group leader. Would a coach role be an appropriate place for them to serve? Or do you think coaches and volunteer directors should only be pulled from who's already on the team?
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah. And I say absolutely not. And to the last part of your sentence there. Yeah. I mean, if you've got somebody like that, someone who's a little bit older, that's not necessarily going to, roll around on the floor with a 3-year-old or something like that, but you feel like they could get passionate about the mission and vision of your children's ministry, or your student ministry, and they're organized, they're, detail oriented, they're people who can be passionate and talk about, your mission and vision, and, have time during the week to do stuff like this, then absolutely. Specifically for, in my opinion, the volunteer director roles, the coaching roles for us are a little bit tough because I really want them to be someone who can, duplicate themselves, who can replicate themselves as a leader. And so there does need to be a little bit of a been there, done that, type of a person.
Sure.
But I don't think that that's a minimizing factor. I think if this person that the person asking the question is talking about can learn what it means to be a great small group leader, if you buy them, the Creating a Lead Small Culture or the Lead Small book, and you ask them to read through it, something like that, then absolutely make them a coach. I'm a huge, huge, huge believer of if you've got someone who can do it, but maybe it doesn't add up, from the perspective of them never serving in that ministry before, I still think that it's a no-brainer to put them into that role, and make them a leader of leaders. It's totally okay. In fact, I'll give one quick example as we wrap up. The church I was at before Anthem, I was in the process of launching our guest services team at a new campus, and I just needed someone who was going to be detail oriented, who had some extra time on their hands, and someone that people could follow. And so I was asking around for names, and somebody said, well, there's this guy named Bruce who I think would be a great fit. And he had, been on the parking team, I think at one point or something like that, but had never really been in or on a guest services team, like in the formal, respect. And so I sat down with this guy and I pitched this idea to him of him being the volunteer director of guest services and overseeing all the guest services teams, parking, the welcome team, all that type of stuff. And he agreed to it, which I was really excited about. And then I think I was 24 at the time, being a 24-year-old leader, I then began to teach him everything I knew about leadership and systems and teams. And, I'm like coaching this gentleman up. And I found out 2 weeks later that the gentleman I was talking to was a former 3-star general in the military and had led, thousands and thousands of people. And I just remembered feeling like such an idiot. Here I was. I need to shut up and learn from this guy. He doesn't need to learn from me, But man, he was one of the best volunteer directors that I've ever worked with. And he really had little to no experience, but he was a learner. And so because of that, I was able to, like I mentioned earlier in our time together, Nick, I was able to resource him, give him a budget line, give him a mission and a vision that he could rally around, give him a team of people, give him, everything that he needs to succeed from resources, and then gave him books and training videos and, just resourced him. And then I let him run with it. And he grew that team far beyond, anything that I could have done in addition to all the other things that I needed to do. So Bruce is a great example of someone who was not really involved in something like children's ministry. Honestly, I could have made Bruce, the volunteer director for kids ministry. He'd never, been in kids ministry ever in his life. But he's the type of person who I would say, oh yeah, this guy can lead people. He can be detail oriented. He wants to learn. He's passionate. I'm going to put him in charge of something. So my hope is whoever asked that question, if you've got someone like that in your seats or anyone who's listening, give them ownership of ministry and set them up to win. I think, Nick, one of the things that always kind of worries me about, coaching, other leaders to do this system is that sometimes we just rush. We hear a solution like this and we want to rush into doing it, and we don't do our due diligence on the front end to really build the systems that need to be in place and to really set people up to win with proper resources and things like that. And so, take your time as you roll out this system, seek out proper resources, ask great questions, on Facebook pages and to Ministry Boost folks, and let it take its time. But when you do it, you will be blown away at how much more bandwidth you have to invest into other areas of your ministry. And you'll get to see firsthand what it looks like when you allow people to become owners of ministry. They fall in love with ministry and making a difference in the life of your church like you'll never see in any other opportunity. It's really incredible.
It is, and it's a totally different way to lead ministry. And I'm excited about your new course that just came out, Empowering Volunteers to Lead Like Staff with Ministry Boost, because it's this. It's like, how you did this.
Yep.
You're going to teach people how to do that. But thanks for spending time talking with us on the Volunteer Bootcamp, and then also for following up with all these questions we weren't able to get to. And I'll definitely point people to your course if they want to implement this in their ministry, which everybody should. I mean, this is the best way to lead a ministry, is to not do everything yourself. You know what I mean?
Sure. So, to not do everything yourself, and also to not just wait until staffing dollars comes around. You can staff your ministry right now with amazing volunteers who are willing to say yes to serving, 10 to 12 hours a week and putting in some extra time. So, I'm really excited about that Ministry Boost course as well. It's going to be a 5-week course where we're really going to get into the weeds of what it looks like to implement this system. And I'm really excited about it. Nick, thanks for having me on this call, man. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jon. This is really helpful.
Good. I'm glad.
All right. Well, Jon is gold. I loved the original interview I had with him, months back, and then this talk that he gave during Volunteer Bootcamp and the questions we were able to cover right there. I mean, he's just a well of resource about this topic, and he's really doing it in his church, leading with less staff, empowering volunteers in huge ways. And here are a few action items I thought of coming out of that episode. One would be to create a new org chart for you. What would it look like if you created a new org chart of your teams, your volunteers, and put volunteer leaders and coaches and directors in that org chart so that you're not doing and leading everything? Another action step after that would be to write the job descriptions. And you can get our job descriptions from our church for our volunteers from my site. Just go to nickblevins.com. There, look under the free resources. You'll find it available there. So don't start from scratch. We didn't. Those job descriptions that you'll get from us are probably a mashup of a number of other churches' job descriptions that we've used over the years. And then the last action step is, once you have that in place, empower one leader. Empower one leader to step into one of those roles and see what they can do. And it's probably going to be 80% of what it should be to start, or maybe even 60%, but that's okay. Invest in them, pour in them, develop them, and see what they can do. And it'll probably surprise you, because we tend to forget how we were when we were 60% of what we needed to be to lead in our role well. So you do those 3 things, you'll be on the right track. You can get all the links and notes and all that at nickblevins.com/episode 175. Don't forget to check out ministryboost.org for those upcoming webinars, Creating Sensational Ministry Environments, January 23rd, Developing Leaders, a Pipeline and a Plan for Growing Your Ministry Team, on February 12th. And then we're still figuring out the date and time for that webinar about keeping kids safe online, which of course we're all interested in. So we'd love to see you at one or more of those live online events. But thanks for listening. We're wrapping the series up next week with Christine Kreischer talking about how to retain volunteers. And if we do it really well, it actually lessens the need for recruitment. So I'm looking forward to that. And then to all the interviews we're going to have after this series wraps up. But thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. Hope you have a great week. And I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.